Amid the silent corridors of the Vatican, where the sacred and the secret intertwine, rumors persist about the existence of an enigmatic figure, an antipope operating in the shadows. While Pope Francis leads the Catholic Church, it is speculated that a parallel authority, hidden from the world's eyes, influences decisions and challenges the unity of the faith. This duality raises unsettling questions about the true nature of power and spiritual leadership. Throughout history, the Church has faced internal divisions and disputes over the throne of Peter. Today, subtle signs, from discreet symbols to ambiguous statements, suggest that a silent battle may be underway within the sacred walls. In light of this, an inevitable question arises: is the Church divided between the visible and the hidden, between the Pope and an Antipope? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference for YouTube to deliver these videos to more people, and for me to keep bringing you this content. I'm counting on you. Let's go to the video. Have you ever heard of an antipope? Most people have never stopped to think about it. But what if I told you that at certain points in history, 2, sometimes even 3, men sat on the most powerful throne of the Catholic Church, each claiming to be the true pope? This isn't fiction. It has happened more than once. And the most unsettling part, it might be happening again in a way no one notices. At first, the idea of an antipope may sound like an exaggeration. But when you dig deeper into the subject, it starts to make sense. The term arose in the 3rd century with Hippolytus of Rome, who rebelled against Pope Calixtus I. It was a dispute over doctrine and authority, and there began, quietly, a precedent that would haunt the Vatican for centuries. The most absurd and revealing case occurred between 1378 and 1417. 3 men declared themselves pope at the same time. 3. Rome, Avignon, and Pisa, each with cardinals, masses, and followers, each one believing he was chosen by God to lead the Church. And if that was possible back then, what would stop something similar today, even in a more disguised form? This is where the thread starts to unravel. At that time, the war was out in the open. Today, if it exists, it's silent. A new schism would bring incalculable damage. But what if it has already begun? Not as a clash between 2 popes, but as a hidden pact, a dark influence operating behind the scenes? The ancient disputes always involved political forces. France, for example, supported Antipope Clement VII. Nothing was purely theological. There was power, influence, territory. Today, reality doesn't seem that different. The Vatican is a global power, a sovereign state, a financial center with worldwide reach. Faced with this, a question arises: could the figure of the Antipope have survived through time? And if it hasn't disappeared, has it adapted? Maybe it's not on a separate throne, but behind the scenes of the current papacy, influencing decisions. What once seemed absurd starts to make sense when you observe certain signs. In recent years, Pope Francis has been involved in controversies over statements seen as contrary to traditional doctrine. This has caused internal divisions. Doubts have emerged. Could there be another force behind his decisions? Names, rumors, and discrete figures move through the Vatican with more power than they appear to have. Various analyses point in the same direction. Something has changed within the Church's structure. Not something official, but a parallel influence. As if there's a second gear operating with weight, yet without visibility. This time, there aren't 2 popes in open conflict. There is one pope, and something that accompanies him. Something some call an antipope, not in the classic sense, but as an anti-power. A silent force acting without declaring itself. And that, precisely, is what makes everything more dangerous. This is the starting point. And to understand how this situation took shape, we need to go back to the moment that changed everything: the resignation of Benedict XVI. After nearly 600 years without precedent, it was no ordinary gesture. It may have been the beginning of something that has never been fully revealed. Do you remember where you were on February 11th, 2013? It was on that day that the world received unexpected news. Pope Benedict XVI announced his resignation from the papacy, an unprecedented gesture in modern times, which immediately raised questions. What could have led the leader of the Catholic Church to make such a drastic decision? Officially, Benedict XVI cited his advanced age and decreasing strength as the reasons for his resignation. In a letter sent to his biographer shortly before his death, he revealed that he had been suffering from insomnia since 2005, worsened by the side effects of sleeping medications. An incident during a trip to Mexico and Cuba in 2012, where he woke up with a bloodied face and no memory of what had happened, highlighted his physical frailty. However, some believe that these health reasons were just the tip of the iceberg. At the time, the Vatican was facing a series of scandals, including the Vatileaks case, where confidential documents were leaked, revealing corruption and internal disputes. The Pope's personal butler, Paolo Gabriele, was accused of being responsible for the leaks, exposing tensions within the Roman Curia. In addition, rumors circulated about a secret report prepared by 3 cardinals at the request of Benedict XVI. This document, according to reports, detailed a network of blackmail and corruption involving members of the high clergy. The existence of this report was never officially confirmed, but its alleged revelations are said to have deeply shaken the Pope. Given this scenario, it is plausible to consider that Benedict XVI felt he no longer had control over the situation. Internal pressure, scandals, and his weakened health may have contributed to his decision to resign. But was that all? After his resignation, Benedict XVI retired to the Mater Ecclesiae monastery within the Vatican, where he lived in seclusion until his death. During this period, he retained the title of Pope Emeritus, an unprecedented situation that sparked debates about the coexistence of 2 living popes. This duality fueled theories about a possible division within the Church. Some believe that Benedict XVI's resignation was the result of a silent pact, a negotiated transition to allow the rise of a new leadership with a different agenda. The election of Pope Francis, with his more progressive style, reinforced this perception. Changes in traditional church positions and statements considered controversial by conservative sectors increased the sense of rupture with the recent past. Could it be that Benedict XVI's resignation marked the beginning of a new phase in the Church, defined by a visible leadership and another hidden one? Could we be witnessing a carefully orchestrated transition, where power is shared between the current Pope and a figure in the shadows? These questions remain without definitive answers. What we do know is that the resignation of Benedict XVI was an unprecedented event, which opened the door to speculation and theories about the true state of the Catholic Church. And perhaps, by looking at the events that followed, we can find clues about what is really happening behind the scenes of the Vatican. There's something that caught my attention from the very beginning. When Benedict XVI resigned, the whole world looked to Francis as the new leader of the Church. But inside the Vatican, something didn't seem quite so clear. It wasn't just a change of name or posture. It was as if a second structure had emerged there, subtly but real. A church that appears, and another that operates in silence. Since then, many voices have begun to point to an undeclared division. Francis spoke of a more inclusive church, open to dialogue with the modern world. But in various internal circles, especially among those closest to the former Pope, this discourse started to be seen as a sign of rupture, not continuity. As if there were an agenda opposing what had been followed up to that point. And this is where one of the most intriguing theories of recent times comes in. The idea that since 2013, the Church has come to exist on 2 levels. The first is visible, headed by Francis, with all the rituals and public appearances. But the second remains invisible, a silent network of influence that doesn't dissolve with a resignation, nor disappear with a new election. Benedict XVI never left the Vatican. He continued to wear white, retained a title that had never existed before, Pope Emeritus, and even kept his papal ring, though inactive. These details, which might seem merely formal to many, are seen by theologians and scholars as powerful symbols, signs that perhaps his spiritual authority never truly ended. The coexistence of 2 living popes had never occurred before in modern times, and the way the Vatican handled it, without much clarification, without ceremonial rupture, only fueled what many already suspected, a possible negotiated transition. As if something had been divided, without ever being announced. Within this theory, Francis would be the public face, the figure who guides the Church in a more pastoral, more political way. But the true doctrinal core, conservative and traditionalist, would be protected by a second power network, older, more discreet, and much harder to identify. Some call this force the hidden Church. Others, more daring, speak of the symbolic return of an Antipope. Not someone who self-proclaims to be Pope, as in the times of great schisms, but a figure or group of figures that shapes the course of the Church without appearing at the pulpit, without ceremonial robes, without statements, only influence. Francis's controversial statements, at times seen as contradictory to traditional teaching, have only heightened this sense. When he speaks on delicate topics like same-sex unions, divorce, and the Eucharist, part of the Church feels that a silent rupture is underway. And that rupture does not seem spontaneous, but guided. The Vatican's silence in the face of internal criticism also reinforces the feeling of something that cannot be spoken aloud. When figures like Vigano make heavy accusations and no one responds firmly, the question arises, is the silence caution, or fear that a reply would only fuel what cannot be denied? Over time, many of the faithful began to feel that something had shifted within the structure of faith. A sense that there is one church that speaks, and another that listens. One that appears, and another that decides. And when symbols, traditions, and even behaviors start to reflect this division, it becomes hard to deny. There is an unresolved tension at the very heart of the Vatican. There's something that started to bother me when I began to study Pope Francis's speeches more closely. It wasn't just the content, it was the way he said certain things, words that, at first glance, seemed normal. But when you listen carefully and compare them to the context, they sound like warnings, messages hidden in plain sight. In 2016, for example, he said something that stuck in my head for days. We are not simply living in an era of change. We are living through a change of era. Sounds like a metaphor, right? But if you stop and think, what exactly did he mean by change of era? This was said during a homily, not in a political speech, not at an international event. It was said as if it were something natural, but it was anything but ordinary. Another strange moment came in 2020, right at the height of global tensions. Francis said that humanity is at a crossroads, and that if it did not choose fraternity, it risked self-destruction. Strong, right? The word self-destruction, spoken by the supreme leader of the Church, is not casual. Not when it is repeated in various contexts, with increasingly direct tones. And there's more. In several public audiences, he began to emphasize a recurring idea: spiritual vigilance. But not the usual kind, not that generic thing everyone's heard before. He would say, be alert. We do not know the day or the hour. Sounds familiar, I know. It's in the Bible. But the way he delivered it, almost like a preparation, as if he were warning us that something truly big is coming, was different. It felt personal. Some people say this is all an exaggeration, that the Pope is just repeating traditional teachings. But look, I did the research. I watched the speeches, reread the texts, listened to the tone of voice. There's something there. Something that seems to be said behind what is allowed to be said, as if there were a hidden layer of message for those who know how to listen. And I'm not the only one who saw it. There are theologians, serious analysts, who have started to raise this hypothesis. Francis may be using these phrases as a subtle way to warn the world. He can't be direct. The Vatican is pure politics, but he speaks. In codes, in repetitions, in pauses. And each of these phrases seems to fit into a larger narrative, of an ending, of a rupture, of something about to be revealed. Do you believe in coincidence? Because some of his statements coincide with ancient prophecies. The one from Saint Malachi, for example, points to Francis as the last in the line, Peter the Roman, who would guide the flock in times of great tribulation. The Church has never officially recognized this prophecy, but it still circulates. And when the Pope's words come so close to it, how can you not wonder? And what impresses me most is how these phrases don't cause scandal. They go unnoticed. They're right there in the records, in homilies, in Vatican bulletins. But no one talks about them in the headlines. Why? Is it ignorance, or fear of what might be discovered if people start connecting the dots? Sometimes the truth isn't hidden. It's too exposed to be noticed. And maybe what Francis is trying to do is exactly that, to show without pointing, to suggest without declaring, so that each person can decide what to do with the warning that was given. This interpretation isn't comfortable, but it's not empty either. It's all there. You just have to pay attention. Not everyone likes to talk about prophecies. They make people uncomfortable, create unease, but they also have the power to plant a doubt that never really goes away. And that's exactly what happened when I came across a prophecy forgotten by many, yet one that seems to come alive with every step the church takes. The prophecy of Saint Malachi. Have you ever heard of it? It's made up of 112 enigmatic mottos, each one attributed to a pope. And according to records, Francis would be the last on the list. This isn't the kind of information the Vatican likes to share, and for good reason. The final motto speaks of a pope named Peter the Roman, who would rule during violent persecutions and witness the destruction of the city of Seven Hills, Rome. The detail? Francis is the 112th pope. The name Peter has never been used by any pope after Saint Peter. It's considered too sacred to touch. And even though Francis didn't take that name, the content of the prophecy itself describes tribulations that many see unfolding right now. A church under pressure from both within and without, scandals, spiritual wars, and a world that seems increasingly on the verge of a moral collapse. What's most intriguing is how these prophecies, once dismissed as medieval exaggerations, have resurfaced behind the scenes, and not just among the curious. Priests, theologians, and even some members of the Curia have begun to treat them with less disdain. Coincidence? Or is it the kind of thing that starts to feel possible when the ground begins to shake? Francis has never spoken directly about this prophecy, but his words, they come too close to themes we never expected to hear from a pope. When he talks about the judgment that is approaching, about the self-destruction of humanity, about an irreversible change, these words carry a weight that goes far beyond a pastoral message. And there's more. The current tension between tradition and change, between preservation and reform, isn't just a theological issue. It's spiritual, and many believe that this tension is exactly what the prophecy foretold. An internal division so deep it splits the church in two, exactly as we've been seeing. In the eyes of believers, this isn't just ecclesiastical politics. It's the fulfillment of something ancient. If all of this is just coincidence, that would already be a lot. But if it's not, if Francis truly is the last in the visible line, and if the next pope takes on a new identity, perhaps even using the forbidden name, Peter, what would that mean? This isn't about predicting dates or spreading fear. It's about recognizing that there are too many signs to ignore. Francis himself has warned more than once that we don't have much time. And what if these phrases aren't just casual reflections, but part of something he knows, and is trying to warn us about in the only way he can? Prophecies, when spoken, always seem distant. But when events begin to line up with them, it's impossible not to ask, could we be living inside the story they tried to announce? There's something that has always intrigued me about the Vatican. It's not just the speeches or the ceremonies, but what isn't said, what is kept, locked away, hidden. There is a part of the church that no one sees, and that never appears on camera. And it is there in the so-called apostolic archives that documents rest which could change everything we think we know about faith, history, and power. Most people have no idea, but there are over 80 kilometers of underground corridors, filled with texts ranging from papal letters to secret records of trials and visions. And this isn't theory, it's fact. The archives exist, and access is so restricted that not even cardinals can consult whatever they want. The question is inevitable. What exactly is being kept out of the world's sight? The name was changed. It used to be called the Secret Archives of the Vatican. Later it was changed to Apostolic Archives, but the content, that remains sealed. Some scholars who've had limited access speak of documents about contacts with ancient civilizations, unexplainable apparitions, even veiled references to extraterrestrial phenomena. Things that, if revealed, would cause a real shock to traditional faith. There's one specific case that left me speechless. Sister Maria de Agreda, in the 17th century, claimed to have bilocated, to be in two places at once. And more, indigenous people in New Mexico reported contact with a lady in blue, who preached Christianity before the arrival of missionaries. This isn't from conspiracy blogs, it's in the church's own historical records. And guess where part of those documents ended up? In the sealed archives. Now, with the new Pope, Leo XIV, and the growing pressure to digitize these documents, many believe we may finally see part of that content. But others fear that in the process, sensitive information will be erased, filtered, edited so that only what is convenient is shown to the public. And why hide so much? Why protect this content so fiercely? We're not just talking about preserving history, but about controlling the narrative. Because some truths, once brought to light, don't fit into the structure of power the Vatican needs to maintain. What's most curious is the silence. A heavy, strategic silence. When asked about certain documents, the response is always vague. It cannot be confirmed. It's under analysis. Time goes by, and nothing is revealed. This doesn't just raise suspicions. It raises uncomfortable certainties. What if part of humanity's history is locked in there, but can't be told because it would challenge the pillars of organized faith? What if the very concept of miracle, of divine intervention, is recorded in a way completely different from what we hear from the pulpits? The archives aren't just a depository of old paper. They are the backbone of centuries of decisions that shaped empires, destroyed lives, and built myths. And to this day, they remain locked behind 7 seals, while the world outside speculates, without knowing how close, or how far, it really is from the truth. Every hidden document is an unanswered question. Every closed door is a muffled scream. And every silence may be the greatest sign that there's more to discover than any of us can imagine. When we look at all of this together, the history of antipopes, the mysterious resignation of Benedict XVI, Francis's veiled phrases, the silent symbols, the forgotten prophecies, and the sealed archives, an inevitable feeling arises that something much greater is moving in the shadows. We're not just talking about a theological dispute. We're talking about a silent war for spiritual control, for narrative, for truth. Maybe what we're seeing are only fragments, loose pieces of a puzzle that was never meant to be fully assembled. But one thing is certain, the signs are there, and what once seemed like theory now reveals itself as a veiled plot with layers far too deep to ignore. This story is just one piece, and one day, maybe you'll see the whole puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share, because more voices mean more discoveries.